So last night we did the first module of chapter 11, and tonight we'll finish it up and then do all of the end of course things, the end of course evaluation and the assessment and any other things that are required. So we're going to talk about how to identify network requirements, and that's a big deal. How to recognize practical limitations, and about physical installation procedures and challenges. And all of this, identify the requirements and then recognize the practical limitations, kind of reminds me of a story that you may or may not care about. But I was at a seminar, I guess, when the Navy was going to what they call TQL, which was actually what industry called TQM, Total Quality Management. And they talked about before in the auto industry where it was first implemented, that before they got people together to do design, which increased or decreased the time by an enormous number of months, that the designers had designed this really great looking car and had taken it to the builders, basically. The guy's got to set it up. And the old German there said, there's not a machine in the world can make the A-frame that you design. So that's kind of where we're coming from here, to identify the requirements. What are the requirements? People get together, and then what are the limitations that we have on our network? What are the limitations that we have on our resources? And you know, how much money are they going to let us spend? And that's always going to be an issue. How much money can we spend? What can we do? I was administrator on one network where they didn't like spending a lot of money, and another network where my boss just loved gadgets, and where you go find a really cool gadget, and he would buy it. And then about the physical installation procedures and challenges, and you're going to experience all of those different things. So technical knowledge, and that's what we're doing here, is gaining technical knowledge. How does it work? How do these things fit together? What are some of the limitations that I have on these? But after we do that, gain the knowledge and create a network, and a lot of networks have been over time just kind of happen. We add something here, we add something there, and pretty soon we've got a mesh that may or may not communicate well, and it probably won't work well. So planning, laying out both the physical as well as the virtual structure. How is the data going to flow, and where are we going to put these devices? What kind of environment are they going to be in? We had one at one of the places, the healthcare place. We had, I don't know, I think I've told you probably, I think we had 12 physical locations. And I went to one of them one time, I was having a problem. The router was in the attic. This was in Virginia in July, and the attic, the temperature must have been 140, 150 degrees in there. Probably not really good planning, because we would like some airflow in these devices so that they can cool themselves. And some of these are extremes, and some of these are really maybe odd sort of illustrations, but these things happen. What kind of planning are we going to do? You may get locked into a technology that we don't want, or a technology, let's buy the cheapest one, and then you find out that it's incompatible with what you have or the other things that maybe the headquarters activity provided you. And it may be difficult to upgrade. How good is the vendor? Do they regularly do upgrades? Is it an upgradable device? Look at the history. What kind of support are you going to get from them? So what are we going to do installing the network and planning what goes on in these things? And documentation. And documentation has been sprinkled a little bit throughout this course, through much of the course. Documentation as far as, when you troubleshoot something, what'd you find? What did it take to fix it? And the reason I say that, and I think I probably said this, we used to do that. We have problems and we go out and we'd fix the problem and then we move on. And then a couple years later, have a similar or even the same problem, and it's like, oh yeah, we had that problem about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but I don't remember what we did to fix it. So it can save you a lot of time if you take the few minutes to do the documentation. It can save you an awful lot of time if you take the time to do the documentation. You go into an office and it's got a problem, whatever. It's got a communication problem, a layer 1 problem, a wiring problem. And you see, okay, yeah, it's got an outlet, but it's not labeled. And you go into the NOC and you've got, 800, 900,000 wires coming in. Which one goes to that office? If you've got a wire map, if you've labeled these things at both ends, you're going to be able to immediately find out what's going on with it. And then you go and you find it, you just got a little jumper that goes from the punch down block to the switch. That's the problem. You change the wire once you know what it is, and you're back up and running. But until you can find that, you can't unplug and plug in the wire. The physical things that networkers do generally aren't that stressful. There is some heavy equipment, not that much at all. You may have to lift a server, put it in a rack or something like that, but generally what you're going to be doing is intellectual, and the documenting. What's going on? Why is this happening? What changed? Sort of arrangements. A list of assets, the hardware and the software. What do we own? And one of the reasons you want to have that is when you do an inventory, and if you do an online inventory, check all of your machines and you find this odd software. Where did it come from? Is it something that we own? Is it something that should be there? What are the assets? Are the assets walking away? And that obviously is something that we don't want to happen. That people are walking away with things. And I told you we had the security screws in the cases, particularly in the classrooms that were out of sight, because memory tended to walk away from those devices. Memory was very expensive in those days. Vendor documentation for the deployed assets, kind of mentioned that. What kind of documentation you're going to get? What kind of support are you going to get? The device MAC addresses, that's in the list from the book. I guess that you want to do that. That's something that I think is going to be pretty difficult to do with all of the devices. And if you change a NIC, for instance, the MAC addresses are going to change. That's something that can be discovered fairly easily. But the assignable and available IP addresses you may want, depending on the size of the network and how you assign the addresses, you may want to have one of these IP address management, the IPAM, that allows you to keep track of the addresses. When we first started using IPv4, and when I say we, I worked at this other place for about 20 years, so that would be a we. When we started using IPv4, it was a long time ago, but in the very, very, very early days of DHCP. And we didn't have a DHCP server set up. So what we did was we were going around and putting static IP addresses in all of the machines, all 400 of them, which is a lot of fun if you can imagine that. And we were writing them down on a piece of paper, the computer, the location, the name, and the IP address. The computer location, the name, and the IP address. And then, for some reason, the piece of paper we were writing them on went away. So, assigned and available IP address is a big deal. DHCP really, really, really can simplify your life in the IP address management world. And IPv6 is even simpler because you just set the systems up for automatic configuration. The router tells it what the prefix is, the network address, and it figures out its own host portion of the IP address. So we're going to use those things. Internal operating procedures and policies. We need to set those up. Who's going to do what? Who's going to have what kind of authorities? The things that we talked about at the end of last night. Baselines for configuration, security, and performance. Baselines, what's normal? What's working when it's right? What's working for us? What's not working for us? How do you know what abnormal is until you know what normal is what we're really talking about here. And baselines and monitoring what goes on. I told you about the clients, the Citrix clients that we use, and we would track those things, and they would gradually increase. And eventually it gets to the point that, yeah, we've got to buy more. We got to go to management and say, hey, we need more money for these things because of whatever. And we can take the performance data with us, the documentation with us, and say, here's why, because we're running out. And these guys can't do their jobs because they're unable to connect to the network. So baselines, where we start. And then, you know, this is the way it was, and then we've added this, or we've added whatever, different resources, different demands on the network. And now my memory utilization has gone from 40%, 50% to 90%. 90% memory utilization is not good. I'm running out of hard drive space because the database is growing. Yeah, I need those kinds of baselines to start with so that you can show trends, and when you show trends, show need. Documentation is considered secure information. Documentation, you don't want to allow anybody to have it. You don't want to throw it in the trash where it can wind up as a dumpster dive asset for somebody. A couple of diagrams here, network diagrams. This is one, and they can be all sorts. This one's a sketch, okay? There are a lot of softwares that will help you with your network diagrams. We talk about network mappers. There are softwares that'll go out and find all of your devices on your network and draw an image or a picture of the network based on IP address on subnets. And it will inventory the devices. How much memory is in it? How much hard drive space? What kind of processor is it? What's the motherboard type? What softwares are installed on it? So there are tools available to do an awful lot of things for you, but you really need the documentation, the imaging, what goes from to sorts of arrangements. And I've really found that, and that wiring diagram, those things happened all the time. And they were marked though. When we put them in, what we did, you can get these little stickers that you put on the outlet, you know, whatever the number is, L7. And then on the punch down block, you put the other L7 so you know those two wires are connected. And when you go to troubleshoot it, you know where you're starting from on the punch down block to do those things. A logical example here, logical, how data flows, physical, where the devices are actually located together and how they connect together. The physical and the logical obviously can be different. We saw that in the buses when we talked about, or the devices themselves. The hub was a physical star logical bus. We can have some of those sorts of things going on here, although the physical arrangement kind of tends to follow, or the logical arrangement to follow the physical arrangement, except when you get into switches. If you have multiple physical paths, the logical path, yeah, we can draw it out. If there's any failures, then that obviously the logical path is going to change, because that's what spanning tree does for us. It changes it for us. It allows us to have that flexibility. So the physical is the physical layout where we reach out and touch them. We can see where they are. The logical is the datagram, or the data flow. Yeah, the datagram. The data flow in the network itself. Some other diagrams, a distribution frame layout, the patch panel layout, and the server rack layout. We'll look at some server racks here in a minute. And this would be, what you see in here would be a patch panel layout. So we got these things numbered, and the little index down at the bottom, it says 4 Office 103 and then 5 Office 104. You know, you can do that. I'm one of those that tries to link everything together. So honestly, I think I would do 4 for Office 104. Just, you know, kind of a little hint helper. 5 for Office 105 and things like that. So anything that can help you keep track of what goes on. Any little thing is something to do with these things. So we're going to, and here define the symbols. What symbols do we use? You need an index, a table that tells us what symbol represents what devices. So we're going to define the symbols, and then we're going to do distribution panel. We're going to do a lot of labeling, a lot of drawing or maybe sketching or getting a piece of software. And the software is actually the easiest way to do that when we do those. Standard operating procedures, we at least alluded to this last night. Steps to complete routine operations and the order the tasks are to be completed. So these are, here's the way you're going to do it sort of arrangement. A policy is kind of conceptual, what we're going to do, and the procedures are how we're going to do, how are we going to execute the policy. Who's responsible for each step? What criteria must be met for success? Who is responsible for each step? Back to the schools I was talking to you guys about. They had somebody did one of these things. We were flow charting a process, and it was travel payments. And why does it take so long to get a travel claim settled? And when you've done that, and a lot of you have, it's like, why does it take so long? So they were tracking this thing, and they found one place where there was an empty desk, anybody there in that job for 6 months or so. So the guard mail would come in, pick it up from the one desk, lay it on the desk where there was nobody, sits there for a day, comes back and picks it up and goes to the next desk. So when you do that, who is responsible for each step? So flow charting with responsibility for who does each step along the way. The scope, different things here, number of, I guess, definitions that we would say. How many users and what is the physical scope? The services that we're going to provide. Are we going to have VoIP? How much bandwidth do we need? If we're going to have several servers, then we probably need a dedicated server room. If we're going to have, several servers and maybe 2 or 3 layer 3 switches, a couple of routers, and maybe 5 or 6 switches, we're going to need to organize those things in a dedicated area. And we're going to need to chart before it happens what's going to happen. We moved into a new building one time, and there was some existing wiring there. So, hey, we'll just use that. And we found out eventually, after we hooked it up, it was the wrong kind of wire. So what do we have? What do we need? Be sure that the resources that you need are available, particularly if you're trying to reuse something. Access methods. Are we going to have work from home? Are you going to make everybody come in? How many workstations are you going to need? Can you use, and I'll throw this in, can you use virtual machines to do this? How powerful of a machine are you going to need? Is everybody going to need? Some people may need a more processing power than others. The number crunchers are going to need more processing power than somebody that's typing Word documents or something like that. In security, back to security, what are we protecting? What are we protecting? How are we protecting it? What does our defense in-depth arrangement look like? Are there regulatory requirements? And in a lot of areas there are. Particularly healthcare, and I keep talking about healthcare because it is so, I guess, specific and such a pain to try to do. But the regulatory requirements for your particular industry, and then compatibility, the existing systems and the mandated systems. Is there compatibility? Back to my wiring example. Yeah, we wanted to use those. The first thing we didn't know is where they went from to. So we had to use a toner, the tone generator, that one of the troubleshooting things, we put a tone on the wire and a little receiver so that you go find the individual wires. Then you label them from to, and then after we did all of that, we found out that they were the wrong impedance for what we were doing. Scalability, is it going to be expandable? How are you going to expand it? Most networks can be expandable, but if you do it serially, you may slow things down. How are you going to put in the new devices, the new switches, the new routers? Where are they going to go? How are we going to segregate the subnets that we have? So planning. What goes on in the next slide is going to be planning, but what are we going to do with these things? So this is the verify the existing network wiring, which we kind of did. We found it, but then we didn't really test it, and wound up running a bunch of wire, which is expensive and time consuming. It is time consuming to do wire. So that's why the first one there, run higher standards cable for future expansion. So if we have to replace something, don't do something that's adequate for today. Do something that will fit the requirements for tomorrow. It's going to cost a little more, but it's going to cost a whole lot more if you have to redo it. Multiple cables from one to the other in case one of them fails. Prioritize high demand links. Prioritize quality of service is what we're talking about. Instead of doing a rewiring, we're going to give the high priority links a higher, the high demand links a higher priority for access to the media. Plenum grade, and you might as well use plenum grade even if it's not in a plenum, because for one thing it's going to be safer, and the cost differential is not going to be that much. For interferences, we would find some things and find out that whenever we ran the wire, the plenum grade cable in the false overhead, which was the return air for the system, some of it just roll right over a fluorescent light. Fluorescent lights are going to induce noise into the systems for these things. Wireless survey, best coverage, what kind of interferences, and I guess this is another one. You can spend thousands of dollars for a scanner, a wireless scanner, or not scanner, but a network, or not work. Atmospherics, not really atmospherics, but you find all of the interferences that are around. Or there's a couple of them for the areas that we're looking at, 2.4 and 5 gig, that you can get for, probably about, I don't know, I think it was probably about $50, $40-$50. Software and a USB dongle where you could go around and find those interferences. Best coverage interference, and we talked about the channel numbers 1, 6, and 11 for the 2.4 gig. They should not, one and one shouldn't, we want to separate them. We don't want them to interfere with each other. Overlapping WAPs on different channels to do these things. Reflectors or directional antennas. Reflectors to keep the signal in the building. A Faraday cage, and the term Faraday cage absorbs the signal and keeps it out of the from going out the areas that it can. And we've talked about some materials that are going to prevent that. Cement walls do pretty good. Some coatings on windows will do that. There are a number of window coatings that will keep the signal inside, will absorb the signal or stop the signal, whatever, I guess whichever term you want on those. This is something like a wireless survey. This is a heat map, and this is was a Tamograph site survey. So we do a site survey, and these things, and we can map these things. Some of the softwares and will do this for you. And the signal strengths down here, the red, less than minus 80 dBm, not so good. Greater than 20 dBm. We want the signal strength to be as high as possible on these things, and then we draw the map. Where does it go to? Where are our dead spots? Where are the areas? And then we got over here a dead spot in the looks like in the stairwell, and we probably would like that. Doesn't show, and well, it does show some outside of the building here is red, and that would probably be a good thing. We don't want stuff outside of our network. But what would a site survey look like? Something like this. And what you're really looking for is how far does your signal go? Map it. Does it go every place you need it to go? And can we prevent it from going all of the places that we don't want it to go? Planning, suitable locations for equipment, safe from water, weather, and temperature extremes. And you run into circumstances, and I know that a lot of you are in Jacksonville. You're getting ready, I presume getting ready for the hurricane, and I do sympathize with you. I've been in a bunch of those things. But water here, what are you going to do? What kind of protections are you going to do for your equipment? What can you do for the equipment? And if you have power losses, what are the options? This is an opportunity as you get ready, or maybe, if you don't have time, obviously, taking care of the things that you need to. But if you were the network administrator, what are the things you'd have to think about if a hurricane's about to hit your location? Or, those sorts of things. Safe from power and water, temperature extremes, adequate power, cooling. We have to have fire suppression, physical security. The wire needs to be the correct length. When backup power, maybe or maybe not. Are the backups off-site? And off-site may mean in a different city, because back to in Roanoke in 1985, the whole downtown got flooded. And there were a lot of locations that got flooded where the IT organizations were on the first floor. So a lot of IT equipment got damaged. If the backups were there and got floated away, what's going to happen? Off-site backups, and again, off-site may mean in the same city, may mean someplace else. If you have a safe location, high ground, probably not going to be subject to the local issues, damaging issues, then that's probably going to be okay. I went around the world a lot on that one, I know, but off-site backups, they need to be someplace else. Planning for equipment compatible with the budget. We talked about that. The budget is a big deal. How much money do we have? How much did they give us to buy this stuff? 10 gigabit 802.11ac is going to be expensive. Maybe we're going to have to go with gigabit, and maybe we're going to have to go with the 802.11n, although the ACs have come down. But don't overexpend. Have a sufficient number of resources, as well as those that will sufficiently carry the load for you. Switches. And this is one. Switches, replace, if you have any hubs, replace them with switches. Hopefully we've talked enough about the hubs and the problems with hubs, and switches are just not that expensive anymore. The reason that there were so many hubs is switches were very expensive early on. Hubs, not so much so, but switches have really dropped in price, and I don't think, unless you actually are in a situation that you need to use a hub so that you can see all of the traffic all of the time, that you should even worry about it. And if you do see all the traffic all the time, that's going to be a choke point, because you're going to have collisions there. Supports and protocols. What kind of protocols are we going to use? Do the equipments that we buy support those protocols? And then warranty support from the vendor. What kind of warranty are they going to have? What kind of support do you have? Do you have to pay extra for the support? Do they have 24-hour support? Will they come on site if you need them to support you? What are the things that you would want with those things? And then how much is it going to cost? Cisco, you have to buy the support. You buy the device and you own the device. But if you have an issue, unless the company's bought the maintenance package or the support package, you kind of get hung out for a little while. Although they will give you some help, it is limited for what you get. Ease of management and maintenance, and a couple of things. We kind of get at cross purposes for some things. We talked about that. For security, we would like to have different vendors. Yes, and for security, we like to have different vendors because each of them has to be compromised in a different way. For ease of management, we'd like to have the same vendor. So it becomes a trade-off, again, between security and convenience, and here between security and training. security and management. Who's going to do that? Send somebody to the one school and somebody else to the other school to learn how to manage these equipments. But different manufacturers, how compatible are they? How much different are the management capabilities and the ease of management here? Compatibility with existing equipment, that's always going to be an issue. Inexpensive for small networks, inexpensive multifunctional devices probably are going to be adequate. Small office multifunctional device, a wireless router. It's going to be a switch, a router, and a firewall all rolled into one, and maybe even a proxy server depending on what you buy for these things. So small offices, the SOHO, the small office, home office, don't overspend on those things, and don't force people to buy more than they need for those. Manufacturer warranty, customer support, ease of management, costs, compatibility with existing equipment. We had on the last slide, we talked about that a little bit. Security, widely supported standards. If you are customizing, how difficult is it going to be to add to the network? Standard versions of the operating systems. What operating systems are you going to use? And are we going to use any specialized? Specialized applications becomes an issue for these things, particularly when you start upgrading or in doing the Windows updates. Yeah, we preach, and we do preach update, 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 because that's one of the surest ways to get attacked, is to not upgrade, because the scanners can detect what version, what patch level the machines are at, and then if they're not up to date, they know what to attack from the reverse engineering of it. Layered security, mixed vendors. I think we talked about that. Great for security, not so great for management. Trade-off here, and these are decisions that the networkers have to make, and not in a vacuum, obviously, but you go forward with recommendations, and you're going to find typically, unless it's out in left field, that I think that management's probably going to ask questions, but they're not going to have the technical knowledge to say no, or say this is a better way. They may try to lead you and ask questions, and you have to explain what goes on, but layered security, what are the trade-offs for those things? Physical controls, segmentation, AAA, what are we going to use for these things? The physical controls, segmentation, we're talking basically VLANs here, segmenting the network into different subnets. It helps with security, because if a segment is compromised, the rest of it isn't necessarily, because we can have access control lists on the routers. Who can get where on these things, and what kind of authentication, authorization, and accounting are we going to use? And I think in most, may not last, but right now in most, be it Windows or Linux, that Kerberos is the AAA that is being used. And then the plan based upon the corporate policies that we're going to do. Power. How many outlets do we have? Where are the outlets? Are there a sufficient number of outlets? Do we have a UPS? What's the breaker capacity? Breaker capacity here, because if we use power over Ethernet, it's not just going to be the power of the switch. It's going to be the power that the switch consumes, as well as the power that the switch delivers to the devices. So you have to take that breaker capacity into consideration. And I think that 15 amp, a lot of 15 amp breakers, and if you look at the PoE switches are a little bit higher, so you may have to go with a higher level breaker on these things. Cooling, really big deal. And if you've ever worked in a NOC, and ours wasn't that big, and the air conditioner failed, and I guess we didn't really have a good warranty on it. It's actually been around for a long time, and it failed, and it was going to take some days to get the part that they needed to repair it. So back to the things that we talked about last night, it was a long time to repair it. Bring in a portable, but do you have an alternate? Bring in a little portable and stick it in there. Where do you exhaust, and what happened with this one? No windows in the room. where do you exhaust the portable, and was one of the portable roll-arounds. What we wound up doing was exhausting it into the overhead so that it could get dissipated to someplace else. Fire safety, extinguishers need to be electrical safe. What are you going to use in the NOC? And when we looked around, we said, you know, there is a flooding system, a water flooding system goes through here. Do we want to disable this thing and use fire extinguishers, CO2 extinguishers in here? And the answer is, yeah, we would like to use CO2 extinguishers in here and not water. Moisture, humidity, moisture can be an issue, and after a while you get a little bit of corrosion on some of the wiring, some of the plugs. When you think about the low level of signal voltage, it doesn't take a whole lot of corrosion to interfere with that. So moisture, dehumidifiers, moisture level as well as temperature level become important for these things. And the cooling, the temperature level, one of the things that I've heard for a lot of years is that if you're comfortable, your equipment's probably comfortable. If you're uncomfortable, your equipment's going to be uncomfortable heat-wise for these things. This is the fire safety, and this was just whatever. And I know that a lot of you have had probably firefighting courses. You've gone to training. But we have the class A, B, C, D sort of classes of fires, and electrical, and then class F. Some of them have been added since the last time I went to firefighting school. But a class A, basically paper, wood, white smoke. Class B, flammable liquids, and we usually say a petroleum based for this one. Generally, we're talking black smoke for these things. Class C, they give flammable gases, butane and methane, and then the electrical equipment, computers and generators. And then what are we going to use on these things? I guess we should go down here. Class A, we can use just about anything. CO2 is not so good. Paper, you use CO2, it's going to blow the paper all over the place and spread the fire. The Class B, flammable paints and liquids. Water, not so good. The fire will float away. Foam, dry powder, purple K powder, CO2. Wet chemical is not recommended for that one. The Class C, the flammable gases, dry powder. Class D, and these are a metal fire, a dry powder. Sand also usually a pretty good dry powder or sand can be used for those. The electrical, the dry powder, and the CO2. Problem with the dry powder is it tends to be corrosive. It'll put the fire out, won't create shorts, won't create electrocution situations, but it can do damage to the equipment. CO2, I think, is still the preferred for the electrical fires. And then the deep fat fires, the Class F, the wet chemicals for those. So different fire safety things. Safety, electrical shock, always going to be an issue. When I was in the A school, we had to, when we worked on electrical equipment, take off all of the metal rings, watch, anything like that, and work with one hand. The reason you want to work with one hand is the path for one hand is down the arm, down the body, through the leg, out the sole of the shoes. If you go with two hands, goes across the chest, through the heart, can cause some issues. Lifting safety, lift with your legs, you've heard that. Power tools, power tool rules, inspected, are they safe, and how you use them. Are you using the proper precautionary, I guess, equipment, goggles and masks, depending on what you're doing, whatever you're doing. Ladders, somebody's supervising it, are they at the proper angle? Live optical cables shouldn't be dangling, and they shouldn't be to where we could see anything. But live optical cables, again, just don't look at them, because optical cables, if they are a laser, lasers do permanent eye damage. We're only going to use plenum cable, and the hazardous materials, the MSDS sheets, are going to tell you how to handle those equipments. rack systems. Just looking here, yeah, we're close. Rack systems, racks to put servers in, to put equipment in. We put switches in racks, layer 3 switches in racks. We put routers in racks. We put servers in racks. External mounting racks mounted to the walls, floors, or ceilings. Can be freestanding appliances. Going to have some pictures here in a minute so you can see what the descriptions, what they actually look like. Rolling racks, portable racks. Open frameworks, and it says many of them, actually I think most of them are probably frameworks for easy access. You get good airflow for these things. Enclosed ones for security. We had an enclosed one where at one time the campus director decided that it should go in the in the main lab so everybody could see what a server looked like, and it was really unexciting because it's a computer sitting there, not a lot of flashing lights that you see in the movies. Uprights, the uprights or two-post rack or relay racks have only a single pair of uprights, and then 4 pair posts have 2 pairs of uprights, heavier, stronger. It says often have better cable management features. And again, we'll look at some pictures here. The next slide will look at a few pictures of those. And internal mounting. No single standard for the holes, and usually you're going to get one that's got a lot of different holes depending on what the device is that you're putting in it and where you can mount it securely. And then some use rounded thread holes designed for specific size screws. Others use round unthreaded holes, different requirements, different things from different vendors. Typically sliding rails to pull the equipment out for maintenance so that you can work on it and put it into the rack. Kind of like a kitchen drawer you pull out. And you bring them up for the little wheels. You can do the same things with these things usually. This is a close-up picture, and just as an oh by the way, this is a removable hard drive here, 500 gig. I don't see a switch on it, so it's probably not going to be hot swappable, but if you needed to swap it, you flip the little lever here to pull the hard drive out, stick a new hard drive in when we do those things. And these looks like circuit cards up here for these. These are the racks. We have the floor standing, the enclosure, the security. Roll around if you want to, put it in a situation where people can see things. It's there. The wall mount on the right there. Looks like a good one maybe to mount high. Maybe we would put our switches in the rooms on our wireless routers, although it's a metal cabinet, the wireless router probably not going to work in there very well, is it? But switches in there to keep people from fooling around with them. Down at the bottom left, we've got a 2-post and a 4-post rack, and in fact, that's what it is. One of them's got 2 posts, one on each side, the other one's got 4 posts. The 4 posts going to be a little bit more stable. All these show on wheels, but in your fixed environment, the ones on the right, which show a flat surface at the bottom, are probably going to be mounted top bottom. You don't want to mount them to the wall because usually you want to be able to get to the back, particularly if you've got servers back there. Put the power cords in, put the RJ45 connectors in, the fiber connectors in, things like that. The roll around rack down here in the below the wall mounted rack, and the ones on the right are just what a rack would look like. Rack mounts, what they're going to look like. What are we going to do with these things? What kind of equipment are we going to put into them? Keep cables organized, and I'm going to tell you that is easier said than done. You get them organized, and then you have to make changes, and you wind up with a bunch of cross cables, and I'm going to show you a picture of what's good and what's not good here in just a second. Up-to-date documentation of the physical layout so that if we need to troubleshoot one of these things, we can do it. We can find what's where. Track equipment, formal inventory management system. That's another thing we used to have some issues with. That you'd have maybe 20 computers in a room, and then you go on break and you come back and there's 19. The equipment really wasn't missing from the company. We just didn't know where it was. What would happen is that an instructor would go into the class and he's got 18 machines and he needs 19, and he goes around and he talks to Joe, his buddy, and he says, oh yeah, we got an extra machine. Go ahead and take the one back there in the corner and move it to a new classroom. Don't tell anybody. So the tracking of equipment fails from that. This is, one of those education things that you got to get everybody to cooperate with you, but you do need to keep track of the equipment in a formal way. Label it. That it says label equipment. That might be easily confused. I say label the equipment and have everything with a tracking number. And if you can do RFID tags and the scanners, the hand scanners, that's even better for those things. I said I'd show you what is the good and the ugly, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good, obviously, on the left there. And the racks are designed with these little shelves, for lack of a better word, to hold the wires. And these are very, very nicely done. And these guys obviously don't move things around a lot. The one on the right, if you're not careful, your network's going to wind up looking like that. I've been there, and it's like, okay, we just got to shut this thing down and get this organized. And you just do that, because if you try to track one of those wires from one location to the other, give it a shot sometime. You just can't find where the endpoint is on it. So we are relatively short. So formal change management process, and then software updates. We all know that we should do software updates, and formal change management is something that we need to do. Why do we need the change? What's the purpose? What are you going to do once we do these changes? And then it needs to be reviewed that, I absolutely, and I told you our nurses absolutely positively had to have the ability to install the software that they wanted to try out for their classes. And what they wound up doing was abusing what went on, or abusing the privilege of being able to install stuff, because you got to look at their browser, and they've got the shopping add-ons, all sorts of stuff, as well as a whole bunch of viruses. So did they really need to do these changes? Now, it probably was convenient for them and for us to allow them to do that, but in the long run, it was a lot less convenient for the networkers for that to happen. So it at times may seem that it's a burden to do some of these things, but in the long run, it's probably better off that you do it and maintain the restrictions on the users, because they don't have the same perspective that you do. We have to, and you get lots of complaints. I need to do this. I got to be able to do that sort of arrangement, and this is where, okay, then show me, prove it to the change management board. So the process itself is identification, identifying, documenting the reason why a change is necessary. I need to be able to do this. Well, why do you need to be able to do that? The change request, researching, documenting the steps needed for a change, potential impact, and who will be affected. And this is going to be a change other than adding to a permission or adding a program or something like that. This is going to be an actual change maybe in the network structure, in the way that things go, or changing a program, or changing an operating system or something like that. What do we need to do? What's the potential impact? Who's it going to affect? How long is the network going to be down? Is it going to be down? And I probably told you this. We had, and I knew a bunch of people that worked at Advance Auto. Their IT headquarters were in Roanoke. They moved a bunch of stuff out, but they left IT there because I guess it was just too hard to move. When they did updates, they did them by script, because they had 30 or 40 or 20 or whatever number, thousands of stores to update the software or the patches or the whatever with. What they had to be able to prove was if the change failed, they could undo it by script also. So change request, the potential impact. And their potential impact, they messed one up. and they shut down something like 12,000 stores for, I don't know, 6 or 7 hours. That's a lot of retail. Approval, going through the organization's approval process for the specific change. And the approval process, in a lot of cases, is going to be a change management board. A group of individuals going to look at this from different perspectives. You don't want just IT to look at it from the IT perspective. We want to be able to look at it from the management perspective, from the user perspective, from who is going to do this, what's going to be the impact, what are we going to do. Preparation, get the resources. Schedule, notify the users. This is going to happen, and this may be a result. Unlike, what Windows does, they say, okay, here they come, and then, well, this may have happened to you when we did this update, sort of arrangement. Making and testing the change. Monitoring for negative impacts and changing the network documentation. I've told you that I do changes sometimes, don't document well, but I do changes sometimes, and my wife will be working on the machine, 2-3 weeks later, and say, did you do something to the computer? No. And then I'll sit down and think about it. Oh yeah, about 2 weeks ago I did this, and so that's probably what's causing your issue now. Yeah, let's hope so. But documentation, follow-up, monitoring for negative impacts, and it's not just the next day, it's over time, because it can take some time for these impacts to surface with us. Identify the changes. These are the what we're going to do. Verify that there is a present or future problem in the network. Is there an issue? Do we actually need to make the change, is what we're really saying there. What are the options for correcting the problem? Multiple options, and obviously what's going to be the best option, the least obtrusive, the least impactful, the one that's going to have the least impact on the network, on the users. When an option seems promising, examine it more closely. Ask the questions, is it going to fix the problem? And that's a one that we don't really ask. Oh yeah, this looks really good. Is it going to fix the problem? It's going to fix a lot of stuff. It's going to make this better, that better, whatever else better, but is it going to fix the problem? That's the first thing we need to answer. Will it introduce compatibility issues, other problems, new problems? And then we got to worry about the unanticipated, unexpected consequences, the things, kind of side effects for what we do. How many users and how many systems will be affected? And I would say here, are they going to have to be retrained in order to be able to use the new system, the updated system, the modified system, the change system? How much time and how much resources are going to take? Am I going to be able to do it in 20 minutes on a Saturday morning? Is it going to take all weekend? Is it going to take a week? How long am I going to have the network down? Is the network going to be down? And these are the things that you're going to find. This is the kind of stuff that you get to do outside of regular working hours. These are the weekend projects that you get, or the late night projects when nobody's on or very few people are on the network. And then the last one there, can it be reversed if something goes wrong? And that's a really big deal. Can it be reversed? Virtualization helps us out with that, because we can take a snapshot, and if it fails, if it's like a server or something like that, and we've virtualized it, take a snapshot. If it fails, we can go back in time to get back to our starting point. But it does need to be able to be reversed. If you're making changes on 20,000 stores, and you're going to knock them out, and it didn't work, we need to be able to undo it pretty quickly. Seek opinions or advice from colleagues and technical support, and verify your decision. Talk to other people about whether it's going to work. Information, the requesting the change, the information about the change, why is it needed, potential impact of the change, the benefits, what's the risk-benefit analysis of this thing, a timetable, operational plan for the change, the resources and the people needed, how much time, how many people, how many resources, what's it going to cost, and what are the training implications for this. Are we going to have to re-educate a number of people in order to do these things. The resources and people, what are we going to need? Prepare for the change. We're going to go out and get the resources, buy whatever we need. Have a meeting. Everybody loves meetings, but have a meeting. Everybody knows what their role is in the change. Schedule it. Test the changes in an isolated environment. And again, here's where virtualization may help you out, because we can do this on a virtual machine. And this is one that, yeah, we got the virtual machine, we can do it. It needs to be configured exactly the way the other one is. If it doesn't work and we want to keep reusing it, we can do the snapshot and take it back in time. Notify the users. Make backups in case that we have a problem and we lock up the operating system and it won't restart. That may happen. And then have the return path. What happens if it fails? What happens again if it doesn't work for these things? Test the results. Notify the users the services are restored. Continue to review, and then update the documentation. And update the documentation. This is what we did and these are the results, so that, 3 months from now something happens, you can go back and look at the documentation and say, what we did here may have had the impact on this. Let's do a little further investigation and see if that is the case. Software changes, updates, software changes, major versus minor, and you've all seen these, I expect, in the Windows updates that we get a patch. Patch is a public update. Patch Tuesday that we have every month with Microsoft. Linux has them too. Linux has a lot of updates. Windows has them. Anybody that's created an operating system at all is going to have to update it, because as the white hats keep going and finding issues, we have to fix the issues to keep those nasty black hats out of the system. A hot fix fixes a specific issue, and it may be for an individual company. It may not wind up being public. Service pack is when we consolidate all of the patches into a single file or series of files that upgrades themselves. Service pack is a major update. An upgrade is when we would go from one to the other. Windows 7 to Windows 10 is going to be an upgrade for these things. Maintenance releases for them. Definition updates, antivirus, IPS, IDS may have definition updates. Unofficial patch, a third-party creation, and this is one you may want to consider those very, very carefully before you do that. You kind of want to stay with the officials, with the vendors that do these things. And a rolling release is constantly updating, and I think that really we're in that circumstance in most things, because we're constantly updating, although, again, maybe once a month. It is a continuous process to try to make these systems better. They have a couple of exercises. If you say been there, done that, not a big deal, but and I think is useful to look at these things and what is the process in order to do them. Updating Windows, and this is looking to see uninstall and update. When were they installed? What updates are installed? What's the status of them? Installed on, when were they done? And on these, whether it's successful, what's the importance? Important, you get some important, some recommended, and some, absolutely positively critical, I guess is what they're going to be called. There are no critical ones showing here, but you have some critical updates as well as important updates. So